Hi, my name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV. Today I'm going to be talking about what is possibly one of the most uninteresting but extremely useful things you'll see in studios everywhere, and why it could quite possibly be a game changer for your sort of creative workflow. It's the often overlooked and underrated humble Patchbay. And yes, I am going to be talking about something you simply plug stuff in the front and plug it in the back. Back in the olden days when life were black and white and folks had naught to do, whole families would spend hours on end watching walls. Some were brick and some were stone, but they were only walls nonetheless. There were no TV, no Netflix, no video games, and none of that there TikTok. Life were dreary and very, very boring.
But then came the Patchbay, breathing excitement into the dull lives of millions of hopeless people.
Well, maybe it's not that exciting, and maybe it didn't change the world quite that much, but it's definitely a useful, if a tiny bit boring, piece of kit. But what does it do exactly, and why does everyone seem to have, if not one, then a whole bank of them? Let's start off by taking a look at the basics. At its most very basic, a Patchbay is something that simply takes signals from your synths and sends those signals to something that receives them, like your mixer or your interface. So if we plug in the output from the analog rhythm into the top of the Patchbay, let's do that, and plug the bottom of the Patchbay on the same channel into my audio interface. So really simple, and you'll notice nothing's plugged into the front. What's gone in through the top has come out through the bottom. And now imagine all these inputs on the top are inputs from your synths and your drum machines, and all these along the bottom are to your mixer, for example. And that's a really, really basic use of anything. Well, why bother? Why don't you just plug things directly into the back of your mixer? Well, the issue comes is when you've got more bits of kit than you've got inputs on your mixer or on your interface. And here I've got my Korg SoundLink mixer, but as soon as you get more than 16 or you start getting to 24 or 32 inputs, it starts getting ridiculously expensive. So a 32 channel input interface, for example, is going to cost you an awful lot for an 8-channel initial one. An ADAT interfaces, all of a sudden, you're talking thousands of pounds, when you could just buy a few Patchbays for £100 or £90 each and save yourself an awful lot of money. And I'll just go into how that would all work. So on the analog rhythm, we've got 8 outputs plus a stereo left and right. So let's plug all that into the mixer. Got the 8 separate channels, which are the voices. Then I bring in the stereo as well, because we might want to use something like the kick and the snare and everything else going through the nice effects on the rhythm. So we might only need 1, 2, 3, 4 inputs. But this does give us absolute flexibility on how we use the rhythm, and we'd never have to unplug any of these leads because we've always got everything we need plugged into the mixer. But now we've used over half the channels on the mixer, so now if we want to change the way we've set it up and we want different synths to come in, we're going to have to unplug stuff in the back of here. But that's where the Patchbay comes in. If we plug in the analog rhythm to the top of the Patchbay and we plug in the mixer channel inputs to the bottom of the Patchbay, we've got a much more flexible way of working. And now I've got the stereo outputs coming into channels 1 and 2, and I've got the individual voices spread from channels 2 to 10 on the Patchbay. And now plug these into the mono inputs on the desk. And now plug the other end of the loom from the mixer into the first 8 inputs at the bottom of the Patchbay. So now what I have is a much more flexible system. It's looking like a bit of a wiring diagram already, but basically I've got the left and the right coming into 1 and 2, and the individual outputs going between 3 and 10, and I've got 1 to 8 all hardwired now into the desk inputs 1 to 8. And I don't know about you, but those walls are looking a lot more interesting than the Patchbays at the minute. But do stick with it, because just like the walls, they are pretty essential bits of kit. And that gives me a much more flexible way of doing things. If I leave it as it is, 1 and 2 on the desk are the stereo channels, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 on the desk are the first 6 voices of the rhythm. But we're not fixed to having whatever's on the top coming into the bottom, because that's when you start using your patch cables to patch different things into the mixer. So for example, I could have a mono synth plugged into channel 11 along the top, and now if I want that mono synth to come through the desk, I've just plugged patch 11 and say let's put it into channel 3. And on channel 3 the input will now be the input for the mono synth. It's not likely that you're going to need to put everything through your desk all at the same time, and this is the way you can reduce the number of channels you need to have on your desk. If you plumb it all into the Patchbay, you vastly reduce the amount of kit that you need in the studio, and also the amount of space that everything takes up and the amount of cost. And that's why everyone's got one. But let's take a look at a couple more of the more complex uses maybe. You may well have noticed already that we've got these labels or these diagrams on the top of the Patchbay, and these are showing the different normalizations or the different signal routings that you can set up on them. On this one, it's really handy. We can just switch them on the top. Others, you have it at the front, which is even handier, except for you run out of room for labels. And other ones, you have to sort of take them apart and put them back in certain ways, which is quite awkward actually. I've got a couple of them and I've done them the wrong way round, and I've just given up hope of ever digging out through all the wires to put them back in the right way. But this is really good. So we've got these normalizations, they're called. We've got normal, we've got through, and we've got semi-normal or half normal. And what normal does, which is shown here, is what we've been looking at so far. If you put something in the top, it will come out at the bottom. And if I plug something into the front of that, that breaks that signal, and now this end here takes the signal to wherever I want it to go. And I can plug something in the bottom, and it breaks the signal coming in from the top. So that's the normal use of, and that's why it's called normal, but there are other things you can do with it. So there's one called through mode, and we can see that here, and that's really super simple. The top and the bottom aren't connected in any way. And this is used if you've got bits of kit that have got absolutely no relation to each other. You just need an input or you just need an output. And finally, we have this one called half normal. And the difference between half normal and normal is that with normal, when I connect this, it disconnects the yellow from the green, but with half normal, the signal from the yellow is still coming out the green and it's coming out of the blue as well. So I could do something like have a guitar part coming through the yellow, which still gets recorded dry to my mixer or to my interface, but I can send the signal to an effects pedal. So when I'm tracking it, when I'm playing it, it sounds nice as I play it. You could do that with a vocal or something like that. So a little bit different to a normal and very useful because you're effectively splitting a signal, which is really handy. So now we've seen how they work, maybe let's go into my studio and I'll just show you how I use mine, a slightly more complex setup again. So here I've got 3 banks. I've got this black one on the top, silver one in the middle, and the black one at the bottom. I won't go into what everything does, but just to show an example of the setup, here's my mixer. So you can see I haven't got a huge mixer anymore. Every channel on the mixer has got an EQ and a compressor. So there's my EQ, there's my compressor, both stereo. So I don't need a big mixer with EQs and compressors in the studio at the minute. I've got my Apollo interface, that's got 8 ins, and they're all patched up through the Patchbay. Just to show a couple of interesting things I can do with the Patchbay. On this mixer, I've got an insert mix and this mix insert, and this I can blend between sort of normal left and right, and then a mix that's been sent elsewhere to a compressor and or an EQ. So basically like sending it to some sort of bus effects. And I do that all using the Patchbay. So as I say, these are my signal processors here, my EQ and my compressor from Alicia. Really, really nice, high quality things. So I don't need anything else, just those 2, and patch them in as and when I need them. So I can patch these 2 in using that insert signal chain. That comes through the insert to here, to there, to there, to there, to there, without me having to plug anything in. Because the insert for the mixer comes in here, it goes out at the back to the compressor in, comes out from the compressor and back into the patch bay here, and that's normalised directly in to the EQ. Then the EQ comes back in here, and that's normalised to the return. So input there from the desk, output there back to the desk without having to plug anything into anything. But if I did want to use the compressor for something else, I've got, for example, a stereo mix for the rhythm coming into 11 and 12. So I take the mix from there and put it into the compressor. Really simple. Then I can take the output of the expressor and plug that into whatever I like. And what I've got is the inputs to my interface, the Apollo 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can plug into 1 and 2 of the interface. And if I wanted that to go to the EQ as well, all I've got to do is put the output into the EQ out, because we go from the compressor out into the filter in with the normalised routing. So the patch bay makes it super simple. So as we've just seen, it's not just about convenience. They can save you money that you can invest in other kit. I used to have a 56 channel desk with everything plugged into its own dedicated input, which was extremely handy, but it meant I had a massive desk, and I realised that I was only using about 2 channels at a time. So I sold the desk for a few £1,000 and spent a couple of £100 on Patchbays, and then I had a huge bit of the studio to fill with synthesizers that I bought with the money that I'd saved from selling the desk. And I realise it's a utility and it's possibly a really boring subject. I know for a fact my daughter would much prefer to be watching walls now. When I tried to explain what it was for, give me a wall anytime, Dad. But if you're even slightly interested in anything I've had to say in this episode, it's because you're accumulating a fair bit of hardware and are getting fed up with unplugging and plugging stuff in and wondering about whether you need a larger mixing desk or a bigger interface, and if there's a better way of doing things. And the answer is yes, there is, and every studio in the world uses them. And hopefully that's given just a little insight in why they've got them. And if you did find it even a little bit interesting, don't forget you can catch it whenever you like on our Clubbing TV official YouTube channel on the From the Studio playlist. And I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.